session, and we are ready to begin. Hello, welcome to today's DataManagementU.com webinar session, part of the webinar series that DataManagementU runs once a month, the last Thursday of every month at 12 p.m. U.S. Central Time, which is 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. It's sponsored by EW Solutions, and I'd like to thank EW Solutions for sponsoring this event. As I said earlier, I'm Anne Marie Smith. I am the executive editor of DataManagementU.com and vice president of education at EW Solutions, and I am your moderator for the session. If you have a question during today's session, please put it in the Q&A section. Why? Because we will be monitoring that section and answering your questions either during the session by Jay and Damien's talk, or at the close of their session, we will pick certain questions and answers that are most germane and we'll answer them live. If you just have a comment, please feel free to put it in chat. One of our sponsors is DataManagementEducation.com, and there are courses in data governance, surprisingly, metadata management, enterprise data management, and data literacy. They're online and on demand and accessible for individuals at all levels, and they're all certified. Since you're here, we encourage you to follow Data Management U on LinkedIn and other social media. We are streaming live to YouTube, and the session is recorded and will be posted to YouTube, the EW Solutions channel, at the end of this event. For those of you who would like a copy of the presentation, it's available at the webinar page at datamanagementu.com. If you stay for the whole session, once again, staying for the whole session, you will earn 1 professional development unit and you'll receive your certificate within about a week to 10 days after the session. Please don't contact me tomorrow morning and say, where's my certificate? Give us some time, we'll get it. Okay. Thank you to our sponsors and partner organizations. If you work for an organization that would like to become a sponsor or partner for Data Management U, please don't hesitate to contact me. Today's webinar. This is a case study about Airlines Reporting Corporation, ARC's data management and digital transformation. So what are you going to learn from today? Well, we're going to look at the key components of a modern data platform. We're going to learn how an organization overcame data-related issues with a variety of data services. We'll explore some best practices to ensure successful expansion of your data management and digital transformation efforts. And Damien and Jay will share some valuable lessons learned from their journey. This will be an interactive discussion between Jay and Damien, and I may jump in occasionally. We'll take questions and answers probably closer to the end of the session, and then we'll conclude. We will be done in an hour, I promise you. I'd like to formally welcome my 2 fantastic presenters today. Both of them are thought leaders in DataManagementU.com's Thought Leader Collection. Damien is the managing director of data services at ARC and comes from a background in software product development and large-scale systems development. Jay is the founder and managing partner at Allied Data, the consulting firm that supported ARC in its data management and digital transformation journey. Their focus is on an organization's most strategic asset, data. I'd like to turn this over now to Damien and Jay for the webinar. Gentlemen, it's all yours. Stopping
Thank
sharing.
you, Anne-Marie.
There we go.
Thanks, Anne-Marie.
Thank you.
So do I have control?
You may share your screen. Yes, you do.
Okay. Also, I should have the presentation on my screen, or can you just give me control of the presentation?
Okay, what you do is at the bottom, it says share screen, and the presentation, if you have your presentation open, it'll.
Oh, got it. Okay. I thought you were just going to turn it over your presentation over to me.
No.
Control. Okay.
Yes, it's all yours.
Okay. All right. Just give me 1 second, please. I am going to share my screen now. Oops. Get the control back. There you go. I am not seeing my screen. Okay, here you go. I'm going to share my desktop. And are you able to see my screen now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you, Jay.
Okay. Let me. So, just as an introduction, as Anne-Marie said, my company, Ali Data, was engaged by ARC to help them with the digital transformation and the data management and governance journey. And what we're going to do today is have a conversation, myself and Damien, about that journey. We will discuss what we did, how we went about this journey, what obstacles and challenges we faced, how we resolved those, and then we'll share some lessons learned, and then go into a summary of the information. So, Damien.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jay. I really appreciate it. So, the context here is so many organizations are undergoing this, lack of a better term, digital transformation. So they're moving from on-premise systems to the cloud. They're moving from legacy platforms into the cloud, and it's not just necessarily a lift and shift. It's also a transformation of the way that those old platforms. It's just a different way of working. And you want to take advantage of those sorts of things as part of that transformation. So it involves a lot of moving parts. So today, Jay and I are going to take you through a little bit of what drove us to that transformation and talk about how we were able to engage the organization in creating a viable data governance program at ARC. And then we're going to talk about some of the lessons learned, which I think is very valuable, because we banged into a number of things that, regardless of the size of your organization, I think so many people will have similar challenges. And we hope that we're going to be able to help you sort of head off some of those things and understand some of those challenges at the beginning of your journey, so you can think about them and plan for them, and hopefully help you to be more successful. There you go. So let's, Jay, I'm going to spend just a minute on these next couple of slides. But what I really want to just say is, part of the reason and the genesis behind why we needed to transform our data capability at ARC was, again, this is pre-pandemic numbers, but we were settling, almost $100 billion worth of transactions, and those transactions are U.S. point of sale airline ticket transactions. We engage with more than 230 airlines and over 11,000 travel agents. So we have a massive set of data that we ingest on a daily basis and then process to our customers on a daily basis. So as you'll see throughout the discussion, our legacy platform had some real challenges in doing that. And then this new modern platform took advantage of some of these new technologies. But then we realized, wow, now we've got to get our arms around this thing and learn how to govern it. So we'll dig into all that. Again, we can skip these next couple. I think that first one set the example, and again, this one too. All right, let's go over that.
Yep. So starting with the case study, Damien, we wanted to discuss what was your legacy environment like, and what drove you to look at this modern data platform, build a new modern data platform, and how did you go about convincing your leadership that this was needed?
Right. And so, these things that I'm going to talk about here with regard to legacy, monolithic data warehouses, they're probably nothing new to the audience, and they're very common throughout the industry, right? So you have some, and I'm, just to stay vendor agnostic, it doesn't really matter. You have this rack of equipment or this large installation in your data center. And the distinct components of this is that the storage and the compute are tightly coupled. and they're tightly coupled, and at any given time, they're essentially fixed, right? So I have a certain amount of bandwidth to compute and a certain amount of storage on any given day. Can I expand those and can they grow? Sure. But that involves typically buying more licenses or purchasing more hardware, and that takes time and it takes downtime to install it, et cetera, et cetera. So we look at this as these legacy monolithic systems are essentially fixed on any given day. That fixed concept means at any given time on any given day, I have a certain amount of bandwidth to process things and a certain amount of storage. That drives a number of factors. It drives administrative overhead. So now all of a sudden I have to be very sensitive to the jobs that I'm running. What if somebody else, what if a business user comes in and sends a query off that is querying billions of rows and takes resources away from perhaps a critical business process that has to deliver data to a customer. So you have to manage for that and you have to provide for all of that. Since you have that fixed storage, now you have to archive very frequently and be very sensitive to, well, how much space do I have left? When do I need to buy new space, et cetera, et cetera. The other component of this is really two sort of macro aspects that I think are a challenge for the legacy data platform. One is this concept of single point of contention. You may have thousands of jobs and thousands of users all competing for that same fixed resource. So that involves, managing it. Oh, you can only run certain jobs at this hour of the day, or you can't run certain jobs on certain days because there are other processes that have to run that are prioritized. So you have to have this concept of prioritization, and you have this concept of sort of divvying out this precious resource.
Got it.
Something else, just one more thing I think that's really important, Jay, that to me, it was one of the sort of bones of contention of this legacy platform was, what can we say about this fixed storage and this fixed compute resource? Well, how do I size it? Well, I have to size it for my worst case scenario. I have to over provision. I might have one big processing day a week, or some organizations, one big processing day every 2 weeks or a month, but I have to size that fixed legacy system for that day. So what really happens is I'm over provisioning, I'm over investing in that platform. And that has implications, right? It has cost implications. So that's another component similar to this single point of contention aspect. It's this over provisioning aspect that's also an issue. So
got it. Yeah. So you highlight several points here, Damien. Ability to scale, the financial impact of over provisioning hardware, and the time to value, if you may, for solutions to the business.
Yes.
Right? So those were the challenges that you had to overcome and kind of made the business case for this new platform. So let's now talk about this new platform that you built and what some of the components were and how you kind of went about building these.
Sure. So, some of the things that we're going to talk about are exactly meant to solve some of those limitations. First, we moved our platform into the cloud, and we just happen to be an AWS shop. And so we have a data lake that is built around S3 data buckets primarily. And that's a very highly reliable storage media. It's a very scalable storage media. And it's also a situation where I've separated the storage and compute, right? So now we really have this fixed storage that we call a data lake, which is very common in the industry. There's lots of work have been done around this concept of a data lake. But to us, it's really this very highly reliable, what we refer to as single source of truth for the data. So our lake represents our base data. Regardless of whatever platform is downstream of that or how I would choose to compute on that data, I should always be able to get back to basic, like sort of ground zero, if you want to call it, and know that my data is there and it's reliable and it's deliverable from there. Now, coupled with that, we said, okay, how are we going to compute on this data? And we partnered with Snowflake, who provides a number of different capabilities. But what we really liked is this concept of a virtual data warehouse, right? So I'm able to, as a user, if I run a query, I'm essentially running in my own instance, sort of like what you might think of as spinning up an EC2 instance as an example. And every single user is now running in their own virtual data warehouse as they compute, or every single job can be managed by a separate virtual data warehouse. And what does that do? Well, that's scaling dynamically. Now I don't have those thousands of users trying to fit everything into one fixed resource. I'm scaling all the time, right? So that's a really important part of this. So storage and computers separated, and they both scale on demand. And
Damien,
this is I'm sorry.
Damien, I have a question.
Sure.
Does this involve data integration? Are the differences in the way you rationalize the zones based on data integration or something else?
Oh, no, thank you for that. Great question, Anne-Marie. They're not really the buckets, if you're talking about on the S3 Lake and the zones, they're really about, I guess what you would call normalization of data. So we have the luxury at ARC, unlike a lot of other organizations that can get all manner of data. For the most part, all of our data is very structured in the way we receive it from our partners. So we take that raw data, so you see a raw bucket there or a raw zone, and we persist everything as it came to us, exactly the way it is. And we want to have that sort of in our back pocket, but we don't really use that. We then take that data and process it and sort of, if you will, normalize it, and we store it in a way. We store it with Parquet files, and we store it in a way that it's flatter and has less modeling, or in most cases, no modeling. We want to have what I refer to, and I know the terms are confusing. There's raw, there's base, there's this, that. We just want to have a basic structure to the data, and we want to have the data arranged in a way that it's efficient to consume it. Right. So what's nice about this, with our process zone, is really our sort of production data lake. So everyone interfaces to that. And then with Snowflake, we're able to basically point a virtual data warehouse at an S3 bucket, and you can effectively compute on it if you choose to do that. Right. So it's very exciting.
A lot of I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's it's. Please continue.
Do you have a lot of challenges with managing conflicting metadata?
In our particular case, no, because we have all of our reference data. We pull that in cyclically with our other data and in time with our other data. So in a sense, we sort of view the data lake as chunks of data in time. And so then consumers are able to pull it in. And if I need the reference data for a given day, I pull that along and use the appropriate reference data as part of my computation. There aren't really separate data sources that I'm pulling in from. I try to put everything in the lake and make, if you will, a consistent consumption interface for users. Okay. And that does a couple of things. It provides a consistent consumption interface, but then it also provides a simplified interface, right? There are fewer joins, there's fewer data gathering steps there. It just simplifies the process to produce an output artifact, and whether that artifact is going to, say, a Tableau or some BI tool, or it's literally a report. Does that answer your question, Anne-Marie?
Yes, it does. And are you moving that structured data through manual processes or through an automated
approach?
Yeah,
no, all of these processes. So it's a file drops into an S3 bucket in the raw zone, and sort of, if you want, ingested bucket, and that triggers a Lambda function or a series of or a step function that then processes that data through a pipeline all the way to that file being dropped into the process zone and being made ready for production.
Okay.
Right. So all of our pipelines are automated, and to be very open about it. One of the questions I get all the time about this platform is, well, what ETL tool do you use? And I say, well, we really don't. we more or less do ELT, and we do it actually, interestingly enough, with Snowflake. So one of the things that was part of our journey was that, we struggled with this. Should we, find a cloud appropriate ETL tool? How do we train people on it? How does all that transition work? And one of our implementation partners made the observation that they said, well, look, you've got a staff of people that all know SQL really well. They're all very strong SQL, can program in SQL. They understand your data. You should leverage that. And so one of the things we do is actually some of our pipelines involve kicking off a query in a process in Snowflake where the data is transformed, and then Snowflake does a great job of writing back a Parquet file to the process zone. So effectively, you've done an ETL there, and we've used our compute engine to do that. So sometimes we use Snowflake as an ETL engine, and sometimes we simply use it as one would think of as a modern data warehouse, where I'm taking a bunch of data sources, I'm computing on them, and I'm creating a data artifact or an analytic.
Okay, thank you so much. I apologize for interrupting, but we had questions and I thought it would be a good idea.
No, that's
because they
great.
seemed germane then.
No, that's terrific. I really appreciate that. I love to talk about that part because it's one of those things where sometimes the technology, when you're in the middle of these transformations, there's so many things to learn. There's so many new things. Sometimes some pieces fall into place, and you're very thankful for that. So this was one of those things where it was like, oh boy, we can do all this together. Now, why do we have this slide up here? And this is the sort of the key to the rest of the conversation. And I have this line, I've sort of usurped this, with great power comes great responsibility, but I like to say with great scale comes great responsibility. And what we mean by that is obviously now I've talked about, you've got something called a modern data platform, and you've got this idea that, well, I can just, for the most part, keep filling up buckets or keep adding buckets in a data lake and store terabytes, petabytes, whatever you want to call it, of data. So I have a virtually unlimited scalable data storage capability, and I have a pretty almost unlimited scalable compute capability with Snowflake. So that's all great, right? Wow, people can kind of go crazy with that, and that's why we need data governance. We need a way to manage this terrific resource. So we've created this great resource we call the modern data platform, but now we really have to help people. How do they find data? Well, we don't want to make that worse. We know that problem in the industry today is already awful. Jay would be happy to share with you from his clients how many times he hears about everybody spending 80% of their time digging around for data. So our point was we need a data governance program. We need to help our users manage that data. Where do I go to get the data? Am I using the right data? All of those questions. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more as we move on. But that's the nature for me of data governance in this new world is I've got to get my arms around this scale, and I've got to help people better use the data.
Yep. Very well said, Damien. And I think this is where we, you and I and others in our team started putting our heads together and figuring out, okay, how do we go about, now that we have this very powerful platform, how do we go about managing, the entire life cycle of data, plus making sure we have the right accountability for data that's going into this modern data platform, to minimize risk, to make sure we are compliant, and to generate the business value that everybody was looking for.
Exactly. Oh gosh, we're going to be here a while. Challenges. But one of the things that we wanted to solve or wanted to address when we started this thing was, ask our business users, ask the folks that interact and operate with our data what their challenges were, and we heard, again, probably something that you folks in the audience face on a regular basis: inconsistent data quality. How a query is phrased, creates discrepancies. Do I use this table or that table? Do I have the right data? Lack of standards. How do I know where to get the right data? How is it standardized? Anne-Marie mentioned a few minutes ago, sort of reference data, right? How do I know that I have the right source for that sort of information? And again, the other really big one, which is very nicely right smack in the middle of this slide, is no single repository for tribal knowledge. How do I gather all this great knowledge that's undoubtedly running around in all your organizations? How do I capture that and then make it useful for everybody? So I think this, that sort of previous slide was a little bit tongue in cheek to set up why we need data governance, but in a sense, it's very serious. And this slide really brings that to reality, which is people have real problems with the data, regardless of whether it's a legacy platform or this modern platform, and we have to help them.
Yep. And I think the key takeaway here is how do we unify the silos of data, and how do we deal with the competing priorities, and then how do we standardize things across the organization? So I think those were the big challenges that we had to overcome based on the feedback we were getting from the key stakeholders. That's
right. And so with some of that in a backdrop, how do we wrap our arms around this? We partnered, as Jay mentioned, with his team at Alley Data, and it was wonderful since this was so new to ARC at the time, how do you begin to structure something called a data governance program, and how do the pieces fit? And we sort of settled on sort of this, three-tiered approach where we had folks at the bottom at the technical level, and those folks we sort of, those are the real data stewards. Those are the people that are running around in your organization that, you informally go to, you pick up the phone, you say, I need to understand this data. And Bob and the other department does. Your first question, if you have, your first, action, if you have a question about this data, is to call Bob, because he's the right guy. He's probably a data steward. Then we have a steering committee. And so if data stewards do data management, they're interested in actually, is the data accurate? What's the right data to use, et cetera. The steering committee is more or less focused on what we'll talk about later as the governance aspect of this. So the steering committee in our organization is a supporting organization trying to support the data stewards in their work, and also trying to create the idea of consistency. As Jay mentioned, how do you get this consistent across the organization? So these policies and sort of the direction that we're going is managed by the steering committee. And then on top of that, of course, we report up to the executive group on a regular basis to, basically, because of course we're using resources for this, so they need to understand how those resources are being used and what sort of progress we're making in terms of adding business value around the data.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you have trouble finding people who were willing and capable of being data stewards?
Oh, great question. To the people who were the data stewards, who we found, tended to be very passionate, and they themselves recognized that they were playing that role when we sort of discovered them, and so that's a really interesting thing, because we'll get to a point later in the discussion where we talk about the challenges of those people are great in and of themselves and know that role almost naturally. We didn't have to do a lot of training with regard to that role, as sometimes occurs. So we had these, very knowledgeable folks. The challenge that we had was more or less around, okay, well, if I go and tell your boss you're a data steward, what's your boss going to say? Your boss is going to say, well, is that part of this person's job description? They're on a critical project. I can't have them spending time on this, or how much of their time is going to be spent on this. All of these things, when in fact, what's happening is that person's been acting in that capacity for some time. And it's just sort of one of those sort of, things that happen in all organizations. It's like the underground network, right? Everyone's just getting things done. But when you actually label it and talk about it and try to formalize it, it becomes a very interesting thing. Does that help answer your question, Anne-Marie?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've had some people ask questions that are about the data steward's role and their ability to participate in data governance. I'll save them for later. So,
Okay.
But that does answer the question.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
And one more point I wanted to add, which is very important, is we started off by identifying the different domains and subdomains of data within ARC, and there were many of those. and then started to assign kind of names to each one of those areas, and then kind of rationalize those amongst the team to figure out, okay, who would be the right folks that we should be targeting for the data steward role. And that was sort of a much kind of more of a formal way of going through that. And then we started reaching out with the program manager, reaching out to the individuals and starting to inform them in terms of what's needed and what they would be, sort of be doing in that capacity.
Right.
Clearly
Thank
articulating
you
the
for that,
roles.
Jay. You're right. That's, and it's unfortunate that we don't have time to talk about that today. And that is a important process and component of our work together was understanding, how many data stewards do you need? How do you align them? What is a given data domain and all that sort of thing? That's probably a whole separate talk.
Yes, it is. And I'd love to engage you right now as a promise to come back maybe 6-7 months or early next year and do another talk along those lines.
We will do that. Yep, we'll be happy to do that.
Marie, I thought you already signed us up for one later in the year. Okay.
We need to decide on a topic. So maybe we have the topic, Damien.
Okay, maybe we do.
So while we now that we got into the stewardship model, I think the other big question that started coming up within the organization is, what is data governance and what's data management? There was a lot of confusion within the organization. So we said, okay, let's take a stab at this and make sure we clarify. So we sat down and basically defined what each of these means, and I'll let Damien kind of explain from his perspective, and then sort of the alignment with the business, product, and technology teams to make this a little more clearer.
Right. No, thank you for that, Jay. And that's right. That's really important because data governance and data management really go hand in hand. You can't really do a successful data governance program without a data management tools and processes. But the real distinction here and what we tried to drive in our organization was governance is more or less on the business and product side, right? We want the business and the product to say, this is the requirements on this data, right? So they're telling us what the processes are and what the policies and standards are around the data. And then you have a more or less a data management group, which is generally on the technology side. And they're saying, okay, for us to deliver on your requirements and to support you in that, we need these tools and processes in place, or these procedures, algorithms, et cetera. So these two groups, if you will, and it's use that term very loosely, have to work together to bring this whole thing, this whole promise to fulfillment, because it doesn't work without it. You just can't say, oh, we're going to do data governance and not have anything to back it up. And you can say, hey, we're doing this data management, but that can easily go off the rails as well if you don't have some governance, some guidelines on the other side to help you with standardization and normalization and things like that.
And data definitions. Can't forget data definitions.
Can't forget that. Exactly.
Absolutely. So the key, I think, to success for a data governance program is ensuring that there is the business and technology partnership. Right. And this is where a lot of organizations struggle, because the business, number one, in many cases, may or may not understand the value of governance. They may not have the bandwidth. I mean, everybody on the business side may be fully occupied with what they're doing. And they also need a lot of handholding, a lot of training to kind of get them to move along this path. Right. But I think it's extremely important to make sure we have business buy-in and business engagement for a program to be successful.
Exactly. And the business understands the difference that you've put on the screen, gentlemen.
Right, exactly. But Anne-Marie, thank you for bringing up this one component that you mentioned about data definitions. You could very easily, and probably should, we probably should have pulled in something like references to master data management here and things like that, because anytime you have the diversity of data that you have at ARC, again, which is probably small compared to what many of our listeners are experiencing, you have to have those definitions, and you have to have a way to manage the data at that level. So that is an important component. We didn't spend a lot of time with it here, but I'm glad that you asked that, brought that up and mentioned it, because it is important.
Yeah. And here's some examples, Damien. So one of the things that Damien and I wanted to do is make sure that it was very clear not just the definitions, but also provide some tangible examples of what we meant by data governance and data management. So what you will see here, and Damien will explain how we did this to educate everyone and also make sure it was very, very clear
Right.
the differentiation and what the outcomes were for each one of these.
Right. Thank you for that, Jay. And this is, if I was going to go out on a limb and say to the audience, this is the most important slide in this presentation, this is the most important takeaway, I would say that this is it. And I want to explain to you why that is. And I think it's worth spending a moment here. So we talked a little bit about data governance versus data management in the previous conversation, but here, regardless of whether you're talking about data governance or data management, the scope of either of those two topics is extensive. And if you're trying to implement a program, again, regardless of the scale of your organization, you need to pick and choose what components of governance are important to you and your organization, and what components of management are key to your organization. So this is one of the things that Ali Data and Jay helped us with so much was we were overwhelmed with the idea of governance, and we were very concerned about creating a very heavy, very, I guess heavy is the right word, just a very large and heavy structure and process around this. And Jay and his team helped us sort of cut right through that and said, well, what are you really looking for? What are the outcomes you need to focus on? And we tried to narrow it down to three, what are the top three things you need to do on each data management, data governance. And so for the data governance side, you've got this notion that, semantics and context. I know the meaning of my data and the policies related to it. So we want our consumers, our business users of the data to be able to know that. They know what the data means. They know what they're looking at, or they can find it very quickly. Authoritative sources. Should I use this table or this data source or that table or that data source? How do I know which is the best source of the data for the work that I want to do? And then accountability. Who's the data steward for this data? Who do I go to for help? So to us, from a governance perspective, those were sort of the top three things that we wanted, our program and our process to provide for people. We thought that would make their lives, incrementally improved. Mm-hmm. Now on the management side, some of these are a little bit bigger, but they're just as important. So again, what are the top three things that what are the top three outcomes, you want out of your program? For data management, you really want to have some semblance of lineage. And for us, it's about tracking lineage from the very beginning when that file shows up in our data lake, when it's dropped into a raw bucket, all the way to who the consumer is. So I'm really interested in where the data came from, how it was processed, and who is using it. And that can tell me a lot, right? That really helps me with information about my data and how to manage it, right? If I know that these two data sources or these two sets of data are used by 90% of my customers, I'm probably going to focus a little more energy there to make sure that those are absolutely pristine. Not that all data shouldn't be, but we all know that it's very difficult to put our arms around everything. So how do I prioritize? Also, I'm interested in knowing, all of those mechanics around who's using the data and how a particular piece of data was transformed. Because there's a problem with it, I need to go back and remediate that. So this could help me with that as well. Second of all, trusted data. How do I know which data to trust? I mentioned this a couple of different times. So I use this data or that data, which is sort of the best data for me to get the results that I want. So I want to be able to create something that users can very quickly and very easily discover that trusted data. Finally, and very, very importantly, probably should be at the top talked about first. So I don't want anyone to think that this is number three. It really is number one. It's sensitive data protection. Today, in any of our environments, I'm sure if I was to ask every single one of the participants and viewers, what's the most important aspect of data, and that is how do I manage sensitive data? We have GDPR, we have CCPA, we have lots of other states going to be having new rules around sensitivity with the data. So we need to manage that very carefully. I need to be able to classify the data, and I need to be able to know all the things about the data. So that's a very important part. So those are our sort of top 6 things, 3 on the data governance side, 3 on the data management side, that we essentially built our program around.
This is fantastic. One of the things I think is really important to mention is that the first section under data governance, semantics and context, really go hand in hand with the lineage, the first section on data management. The second data governance section goes with the second section on data management.
Yep.
And accountability drives the use of sensitive data. So I love the way you balance them out. Is there anything you would add to one side or the other now that you didn't have in the beginning as a focus?
Well, first, let me say, Anne-Marie, it's wonderful that you noticed that, and you can thank the magic of Jay Zadie for that, because he's an artist. That's his magic right there, and you experienced it, and it's a beautiful thing. I would say, I would just say that to short answer to your question is not really, except that we realized we needed to dig deeper into these particular aspects. So in starting out with lineage, once you start out with some type of lineage, then you're very hungry to know the complete picture. And the same thing with the data trust. How do I trusting the data and being able to very quickly get to the trusted source, the source you need for a particular to create a particular artifact or create a visualization or whatever, is the speed to which you're able to do that is huge. So trusted data is very important. And then again, on the sensitive data side, right, you've got to be able to really quickly identify these components of your data that are sensitive. So you can very quickly take action and know what you can and can't do with that data. So it was really these top 3 things happen to be a bit serendipitous in the sense that I think we chose really well. And then when we opened each one up, we realized there was a lot more that we needed to dig into for each one of those. And I hope that answers your question.
It does. It really does.
And the one thing I want to highlight here is we did not want to boil the ocean. So when we did this, our focus was on the critical business data that was defined by the business, right? When we worked for each domain, and we focused on that critical business data first. So this was data that was absolutely important for the business to either run the business or to do reporting and analytics, et cetera. And that was our initial scope. And we wanted to be very, very laser focused on that and not get caught up in the thousands of other data points that were out there. So I just wanted to make note of that.
How did you choose those focus points?
So those were around. So the way we did it was we looked at all of the critical business processes and the critical outputs that the company was generating. Now, this could be investor reports, it could be things that go out to partners and et cetera. And then we kind of backtracked from there into what was the critical data that supported those artifacts, if you may, or those business processes. And then that was where we started our journey, rather than trying to go out there and try and tackle every possible piece of data. So that was some initial conversations we had with some of the key stakeholders to understand their priorities and understand the critical outputs, and then sort of use that as a way to drive the scope of the program.
Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
You're absolutely right, Jay. Sorry, Anne-Marie, but I think that's an important thing. And I think, Jay, the way I would summarize what you said was, one of the things that was key that you helped us do is to listen to the business, right? So if you go back to that slide with all the pop-up boxes about the challenges that we had,
right.
You look at these things. This is a small set of the feedback that we got. We tried to highlight some of the important ones, but if you think of it that way, the answer is we tried to listen to the business and say, what are all the challenges that you're experiencing? What do you need to do your job? What would really help you, make your life easier, allow you to do things more quickly and deliver value more quickly? And so that's a really important aspect of this, Jay, and you guys were great in facilitating that.
I'd
Thanks,
like
Damien.
to point out that we have about 10 minutes.
Yeah, so we
Okay.
got to speed it up a little bit.
All right.
So-
All right. Thank you for that.
Go ahead, Damien.
I was just going to say this one will go faster on than I normally do in a talk like this, but the concept here is that if you think about the last few representations we looked at, where we talked about business and technology, we talked about data governance and data management, we introduced this as a community of practice model. And what this representation tries to do is pull together this idea that you've got a business community and you've got a technology community, and they sort of focus on different aspects of this, but this tries to pull that together and really represent this notion that a community of practice in and of itself just doesn't sit in a room and do things. It's part of a partnership model with the business. So you've got business and technology coming together to create this community and to further the efforts of the enterprise here. So I don't want to spend that much more time on this because we're getting low, but let's continue on. So I'll jump in on this one, Jay. I think what we did here was I don't want to spend a ton of time on this either, but I want to get to the lessons learned. But I did want folks to know that when we've been talking about our program, what we needed and what's kind of key to the program is this concept of a centralized data management, a centralized data catalog. So earlier on in the talk, I used the phrase, our data lake is a single source of truth for our data, right? It's where I can always fall back to get back to ground zero with the data. And what we realized as part of building out this program and building this community of practice was, I need a single source of truth for metadata, for all the documentation and all the data and all the definitions and everything about my data. And so we chose, in this case, Alation's data catalog to provide that for us. And one of the things we liked about it is somewhat illustrated here in the sense that it's able to connect to our S3 data lake, our Snowflake data warehouse, if you want to call it that. We use Tableau for some visualizations. We have Salesforce as part of our enterprise infrastructure. We're able to connect Alation to all those things, and it provides connections to that data and visualizations of that data. And it also provides a very rich way for us to document the data. So it is sort of that one-stop shop where people go in our organization if they have a question about the data, if they want to see the data, if they want to, perhaps even compute on the data. Now, they're not changing any data through this tool, but they're able to actually say, if I combine this and this and this, this is the result I get. It helps them sort of formulate queries and do investigations and think about the data. And at any given time, they're able to very quickly find out, again, what does something mean? Why is this data here? How does it relate to other data, et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted to show how, just like you have this data lake as a very foundational piece to a modern data platform, you need a data catalog tool of some sort. And again, we chose Alation. There are many, many others out there. I'm not trying to, promote a specific technology or platform, but there's a lot of great solutions out there. But the important thing is, if you're going to have a data governance program and you're going to support your organization, you've got to have a way for folks to get that information and get it very quickly. It's got to be right at their fingertips so that they can consume it and use it.
Yep. And the three things that I typically like to share is you want your associates to be able to find, understand, and trust the data that they're using. So I think that's exactly the key sort of takeaway from Damien's point is that regardless of what tool you use, you need a catalog that will allow you to do that, because that's going to end up making your associates a lot more productive, give you a single version of the truth for all of the metadata within the enterprise, break down the silos, and also give you some comfort in terms of whether you can trust the data or not.
Right.
So let's jump into lessons learned, Damien, because this is very important for the audience. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, this is, thank you for that, Jay. That's hugely important. But so here's a couple of things. We're going to go through a couple of bullet points here and talk about these things. one of the things that, when you talk about formation of a data governance program and how do you get the business to buy into it, one of the things that was very important was doesn't matter whether they're data stewards, doesn't matter if they were leaders or people who might end up on the steering committee, was getting everyone to realize that this is a community. So if you begin with this process by trying to build a community of practitioners and a community practice within your organization, I think that that's very helpful in sort of crossing that first big barrier of resistance, right? A lot of times you can get, what is this thing? Why do I need it? Why do I want to spend my time doing this? If you make people feel part of a community and part of like-minded individuals getting together on a regular basis to share their experiences and learn together and determine how they want to improve the practice or improve the data for the organization, it's a reasonable model to start with. And we had really good success with this. The other side of this, and I mentioned this one very briefly previously in the discussion, once you call a data steward, you're going to get a whole lot of questions. And so we talked about this a little bit, wherein that, the data stewards are often, kind of the unsung heroes of this whole thing, right? They're normally people who are doing this job and they just happen to have amassed a good deal of subject matter expertise around a particular set of data or a particular area. And they're usually the person that everybody calls with questions about that subject area or that data, but they just don't really realize that they may not be called a data steward until you start building a data governance program. But one of the big challenges and hurdles that we had was once we said, hey, we want John or Jane or Mary who are now data stewards, and we want to get them in a room on a monthly basis and work with them. Their managers really got concerned about that. And we even had some HR involvement from people saying, do I have to add data stewardship as part of their job description? How does that work? How much time is going to be spent? So what I would say to you on this one, without over dramatizing it, is say to you that you might get a bunch of questions about this, and you might want to be prepared when you go to pitch this in terms of the value that this individual is going to provide and how much time they might be spending supporting the data governance community of practice within your organization. And so I would just say some preparation with regard to this will get you a long way and a lot fewer headaches, I think. I see Jay laughing. He knows how much I suffered on this one.
I would just point out that that's a very common situation for every organization that's trying to stand up data governance and data stewardship. Even if they have a data management program in place,
right?
Adding the data steward role creates a set of issues that people need to be aware of before they start down that path.
Right.
And the traditional data steward, data leader roles are probably the best way to start and be prepared for a lot of contention.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And well, here's another one. I'm sorry, Jay. I didn't mean to.
No. Go ahead, Damien. I think we are running tight on time. So
yes, we really are.
Sorry. I'll be very quick on this.
I'll
just say that this concept here is very much related to the previous one, whereas just like challenges with the with the data steward, we were challenged with the idea of following kind of the traditional reading all the literature in the DMBOK and everything that's out there about how to build a data governance program. This leader role seemed to us to be very important. And at the same time, we had a lot of trouble selling that role to the organization, getting them to understand that it was different than a data steward, that it just was very, very different. And in the end, because of the size of our organization and some perceptions around the size of the community of practice that we could sort of manage, we ended up backing off of having a true data leader role and managing to that. And again, that's going to vary with the size of your organization and the types of data that you have and all those sorts of things. I think it's a very important role, but at the time we came to the point of saying, if we push too hard for this, we might not be successful with our program. Yep. And so we kind of backed off and we said, all right, well, you got to listen and you got to adjust. And so we ended up, now we have a collection of data stewards, but we really don't have any data leaders as the traditional definition of that role is.
Yep. And the key is to be flexible and adapt as we go.
Yes.
Right. Right.
I like your last lesson learned here. A dedicated program project manager who can act as champion and chief controller, data governance program manager who also has some project management experience, the selling data governance door to door, knocking on doors, even virtually in today's world, and trying to get people to be interested and be willing to participate. I hate to do this because I could spend all afternoon talking with you two. Your last points of expecting change and being flexible are lessons learned for everything. May I ask that the people who have questions have the opportunity to contact Damien and Jay after the session?
Please do.
Do you have a slide with your contact data on it, or would you prefer being contacted through LinkedIn?
I think
You're both on
LinkedIn is
LinkedIn,
fine.
you're both
I
active
thought
on
our
LinkedIn.
contact information was in the beginning slide, Anne Marie.
Okay.
Is it not? I think
It might
it
be.
is up there.
Yeah.
If you go to the top.
Okay.
Yeah. And LinkedIn
Mike,
will work as well. I think we are more than happy to answer any questions and follow up.
Exactly. Very happy. Reach out on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to help if I can.
Now, I would point out that you'll be back. And we have you recorded that's saying you'll be back.
I knew there was going to be something about that was going to come back at me, but we're
Yes,
really happy
but
to
in a very
support
pleasant
you.
way. We've been thrilled to
Anne
have
Marie,
you.
we're very happy to do it.
Yeah.
And
Thank
we'll
you.
talk later about when and what, but definitely about data governance and data stewardship and your journey on that. I'd like to welcome everyone a month in advance to next month's webinar. It's on 21st century data modeling for business intelligence and analytics. And we will be joined by David Marco as the moderator. And we will have a presenter who is accustomed to data modeling and data architecture with a deep background in both. So please join us on the last Thursday in February, which I think is February 24th, 2022. Register now at DataManagementU.com.